For over 2 decades, the vanishing act of Dr. Aris Thorne, the passionate botanist who journeyed deep into Madagascar's emerald heart, has been quietly filed away. Officially, it was logged as a tragic, albeit mysterious, case of misadventure in the unforgiving wild, a bright mind swallowed by the immense, ancient jungle. Everyone who knew him or followed the sparse reports assumed a lethal encounter with wildlife, a treacherous fall, or simply being lost beyond retrieval in the dense green maze. It was a sad, final chapter, accepted with a sigh for the brilliant work left undone. Until a researcher, meticulously sifting through archival records, unearthed a fragment of Aris's final, encrypted field notes, a desperate message left behind that contradicts the accepted narrative entirely. This isn't a story of a man lost to nature's indifference. It's a horrifying promise that something far more deliberate, far more chilling, lurked within the shadows of that vibrant, isolated land. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe if you believe that lost stories deserve to be found. Madagascar, 1999. The island breathed life, unlike anywhere else on Earth. Aris Thorne felt it the moment he stepped off the small plane onto the humid air. A thick, fragrant rush of unknown blossoms, damp earth, and something ancient, untouched. This was his Mecca, a living museum of botanical wonders, a place where evolution had painted with a palette found nowhere else. His heart, usually a measured instrument of scientific calm, hammered with an almost childlike excitement. He pictured the Adenia wisse, the legendary resurrection plant. He dedicated his life to understanding, hidden somewhere in this impossible density, waiting. His goal wasn't just discovery, it was to unravel its secrets, its rumored ability to survive extreme desiccation, a key he believed could unlock resilience in cultivated crops, perhaps even medicine. But the jungle itself was a character here, not just a backdrop. Towering, alien trees clawed at the perpetually hazy sky, sunlight filtering down in hesitant shafts that barely pierced the canopy. Strange calls echoed from unseen creatures, a constant, low thrumming under the buzz of insects. A nervous flutter started in Aris's gut, a stark contrast to the elation. He was driven, yes, utterly consumed by his purpose. But in this overwhelming wilderness, a seedling of doubt, of vulnerability, took root. The local guides, stoic and quiet, moved with an unnerving ease that highlighted his own alienness here. He clutched his worn leather-bound journal, its pages filled with meticulous notes and hopeful sketches. The air grew heavier, the path less defined, every step deeper into the green mystery, amplifying both the wonder and the subtle, growing tension. He saw a flash of iridescent wings, heard a rustle that was too large for a lemur, and the jungle seemed to lean in, whispering secrets he wasn't yet ready to hear. Secrets that hinted at more than just botanical marvels, hidden beneath the thick canopy. Dr. Aris Thorne knelt, his fingers tracing the delicate veins of a leaf, the cool dampness of the forest floor seeping through his trousers. His gaze was fixed on the intricate patterns, a familiar comfort that quieted the persistent hum of his mission. Just one discovery, he thought, one undeniable breakthrough could justify everything. Not just his years of sacrifice, the grants fought for, the reputation built, but the sheer, aching hope that nature held secrets vast enough to heal, to understand life at its most fundamental level. This quest wasn't merely academic. It was a deep reverence, a search for a forgotten truth, whispering from the soil and the sky. He felt a profound, almost spiritual connection to the quiet, unyielding power around him. He imagined his findings, perhaps a compound in an unknown bloom, presented to the world, a tangible contribution to humanity's fragile grip on existence. The old path is faster, but treacherous. A voice cut through his thoughts, low and hesitant. Elias, his hired guide, shifted his weight, his eyes darting towards the denser, darker fringe of trees ahead. Elias was a man of this land, his face weathered like the bark of ancient oaks, his silence usually companionable. Now, a palpable unease clung to him like mist. "Locals avoid that place, Doctor," Elias continued, his voice barely a whisper, whispers of things not right. Aris rose, brushing earth from his knees, his own pulse quickening, not from fear, but anticipation. His scientific mind dismissed folklore, but the guide's genuine fear pricked at him. He saw it in the tight set of Elias's jaw, the way his hand instinctively went to the small, worn cross around his neck. A distraction, Aris told himself, his focus narrowing on the coordinates, the map folded tight in his pocket. The plant, if it existed, lay in that shadowed place. A sharp pang of guilt warred with the undeniable pull of his goal. Elias's apprehension was clear, a silent plea to turn back, but the years of work, the potential locked within that forbidden grove, held him captive. He took a deep breath, the air cool and carrying the faint, strange scent of damp earth and something else he couldn't quite place, and nodded towards the shadowed path. Elias swallowed hard, his eyes wide with unspoken dread. But he took a single, reluctant step forward. The silence that fell between them was heavy, pregnant with the unspoken warnings Aris chose to ignore. A silence that seemed to deepen as the forest canopy thickened overhead. The air grew heavy and wet as the expedition pushed deeper, the vibrant greens of the outer jungle giving way to a suffocating emerald twilight. Sunlight became a memory, filtered into weak, dappled shafts by a canopy so thick it felt like a lid closing overhead. Aris moved with a practiced weariness, senses heightened, boots sinking into slick mud that threatened to pull him under with every step. This was the heart of it, the place whispered about in hushed tones, where maps turned into guesses and familiar sounds faded into an alien chorus of buzzes, clicks, and distant, unsettling calls. He scanned the gnarled roots and dripping leaves, his gaze fixed on the impossible, seeking the luminous petal, the plant rumored to bloom only in this forgotten corner, its bioluminescent glow a ghostlight in the perpetual gloom. Finding it wasn't just about botanical discovery. It was about a promise made long ago, a desperate hope tied to its legendary properties. Every tangled vine seemed to fight their progress, every fallen log a deliberate barrier. The silence, when it came, was more unnerving than the noise, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps and the frantic beat of his own heart. He remembered the old stories, the ones the guides refused to tell fully, hints of things best left undisturbed, of trails that led nowhere, and people who simply vanished. Then, the faint smell of smoke, too clean, too sharp for jungle wildfires, pricked the air, gone as quickly as it came, leaving a cold knot in his stomach. Had someone been here recently? Illicit logging? Something worse? The thought clung to him like the damp fabric of his shirt, amplifying the crushing sense of being utterly alone, swallowed by the vast, indifferent wilderness. A glint of something metallic caught his eye. Half buried near a particularly ancient moss-covered tree trunk, a man-made interruption in the raw natural chaos. He knelt, reaching for it, the jungle pressing in, waiting. They pushed deeper, the familiar forest floor giving way to thicker undergrowth, the air growing heavier, scenting of damp earth and something else. something metallic and sharp. A twig snapped behind them, not a deer or squirrel sound, but a heavy, clumsy step. Aris froze, his pulse leaping into his throat. He turned slowly, scanning the dense wall of green behind them, but saw nothing, only the shifting patterns of light and shadow. Just the wind, he told himself. Though the wind wasn't blowing. The guide, a man who usually moved with quiet confidence, had stopped too, his head cocked, eyes wide and darting. A tremor ran through his hand as he reached back, placing a tense hand on Aris's arm. Ahead, tucked into a small, overgrown clearing, something unnatural disrupted the ancient quiet. A crude lean-to, fashioned from cut branches, stood awkwardly against a cluster of pines. Nearby, a small fire pit contained blackened stones, still holding a faint trace of ash. And scattered irregularly around it were empty tin cans, their labels faded by rain, glinting dully in the filtered light. This wasn't a hunter's temporary bivouac. It felt wrong, secretive. Curiosity flared hot in Aris's chest, a powerful magnet pulling him closer. What is this? Who would camp here so far from any trail? But a cold dread was rising, a countercurrent of fear that mirrored the look on the guide's face. The feeling of being watched intensified, prickling the hairs on Aris's neck. He could almost feel eyes on his back, tracking his every move. "We should go, now," the guide whispered. His voice strained, barely audible above the sudden absence of birdsong. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command born of deep-seated fear. Aris wanted to argue, wanted to investigate the strange camp, to find a clue, any clue. But the raw terror radiating from the guide was a physical weight, pushing down on him. He looked from the makeshift camp to the unnervingly silent woods around them, the shadows seeming to stretch and deepen. The air crackled with unseen tension. The forest, which had felt like a sanctuary moments ago, now felt like a trap closing in. "We're not alone," the thought hammered in his skull. The metallic tang on the air suddenly seemed less like metal, more like something else, something primal and unsettling. They had stumbled into a place that wasn't just off-limits, but actively guarded. The vibrant green of the forest floor seemed to deepen, the air growing cooler as they descended towards the rushing sound. Sunlight dappled through the high canopy, painting shifting patterns on the mossy rocks and fallen logs. It was a place of unexpected beauty, the kind that made you feel utterly removed from the world, safe within a natural cathedral. Aris, always drawn to the edges of things, moved ahead, his steps lighter now, eager to reach the source of the sound. He paused by the lip of a narrow gorge, where a swift stream tumbled over smooth stones. The water wasn't a gentle trickle. It roared, a powerful, constant presence that seemed to fill the entire space. "Look at this!" His voice was barely audible above the din, full of excitement as he pointed towards a cluster of particularly iridescent rocks near the water's edge, just below the lip. For a fleeting second, the companion turned away, checking the map again, just a quick glance to orient themselves in this beautiful, overwhelming place. When they looked back, the space where Aris had stood was empty. Aris? The name was tentative at first, carried away instantly by the water's fury. Panic, sharp and sudden, pierced the tranquility. "Aris!" Louder this time, a raw cry tearing from their throat, hands flying up to shield their eyes as they scanned the immediate area. There was nothing. No movement among the trees, no splash from the stream, just the relentless roar. The ground that had felt firm seconds before now seemed to tilt, the beautiful cascade transforming into a terrifying, indifferent monster. Where had he gone? He was right there, captivated by the light on the rocks. Doubt gnawed. Had he slipped? Had something pulled him down? The sheer drop into the gorge looked impossibly steep now. The water below a churning white chaos. Shouts became desperate, hoarse pleas swallowed by the noise. Tears blurred the vibrant green, the forest closing in, suddenly hostile and unforgiving. He couldn't just vanish. Not here, not like this. The cold reality settled heavy and suffocating. He was gone, and the beautiful place that had promised sanctuary offered only silence and the deafening sound of unanswered questions. The search had to begin now, in this suddenly terrifying wilderness. The alarm screamed across the valley, a harsh intrusion into the mountain's quiet indifference. Search parties mobilized quickly, a mix of colleagues, local rangers, and hastily organized volunteers drawn by the urgency echoing over crackling radios. Hope was a frantic heartbeat in the first hours, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer unwillingness to accept the alternative. But the terrain itself seemed to rise up against them, a silent, impenetrable fortress. Steep, rocky slopes dropped without warning into tangled ravines choked with thorny bushes and ancient, gnarled trees. Each step was a battle against slick earth, hidden roots, and a dense canopy that swallowed sunlight, making even daylight hours feel like twilight. Searchers fanned out, shouting names that were quickly swallowed by the wind or the rustling leaves, their calls answered only by the distant cry of a hawk or the murmur of a hidden stream. Miles away, the phone rang, delivering fragments of terrifying news. A wife's breath hitched, her hand trembling as she gripped the receiver, picturing the familiar face against an impossible backdrop of unforgiving wilderness. Colleagues gathered in hushed groups, the usual office buzz replaced by a suffocating silence and whispered questions that had no answers. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long, anxious shadows, the scale of the challenge became brutally clear. They found no tracks, no discarded equipment, not even a broken branch that seemed out of place. The initial energy bled into weary frustration, hope replaced by a cold knot of dread. Each failed grid search, each empty ravine checked, chipped away at the belief that this was just a temporary misadventure. It felt deliberate, as if the mountain itself was hiding secrets, complicit in the disappearance. The feeling that justice, or even just knowing what happened, was a rapidly receding mirage, began to settle over the searchers. A chilling certainty taking root as the first night loomed and the mountain offered only silence. The initial flurry of local volunteers and sheriff's deputies swelled into a coordinated, multi-agency operation. State police arrived, their vehicles a stark contrast to the dusty pickups of the mountain community, bringing with them trained search and rescue teams, canine units, and even a small helicopter that crisscrossed the vast, indifferent canopy overhead. The sheer scale of the search became its greatest obstacle. This wasn't a city park. It was thousands of acres of unforgiving wilderness, steep ravines choked with fallen timber, dense undergrowth that snagged at clothing and scraped skin, sheer rock faces hidden beneath moss. Logistical challenges mounted daily, establishing command posts, coordinating search grids across impossible terrain, housing and feeding dozens of weary volunteers, and crucially, facing the limited resources against an unlimited landscape. Days bled into nights, then into a week. The sharp, hopeful bark of the search dogs grew hoarse. The drone of the helicopter became a monotonous thrum of failure. The initial frantic energy began to dissipate, replaced by a grim, exhausting routine. People whispered in huddled groups, their voices low and strained. Was it a simple fall, lost in a ravine? Had a bear or cougar, increasingly bold near human habitation, taken him? Or was there something else, something human and terrible, hiding in the shadows of the trees? The speculation, once fringe, crept into every conversation, fueled by the absolute lack of any concrete sign. He had vanished as completely as if the earth had swallowed him whole. With each passing hour, the cruel arithmetic of survival in the wild pressed down. Hope became a heavy burden few could still carry. Looking out over the endless expanse of green from the command post, the commanders slowly rolled up the detailed topographic maps, covered in increasingly sparse search grids. The official search was winding down. Aris's disappearance was no longer a missing person case with an active search, but a cold case, a knot of injustice tightening in the gut of everyone who had searched, everyone who had waited. He was gone, the mystery absolute, leaving only a silence that screamed of unanswered questions. But somewhere, in the quiet spaces between the official search grids, the forest held its breath, waiting. 14 years spun past like fallen leaves caught in an indifferent wind, each rotation adding layers of dust to the memory of Aris's vibrant presence. At home, the air remained thick with a sorrow that time only polished, never erased. His mother still kept the light in his upstairs window on, a silent, futile beacon against the encroaching night, while his father meticulously tended the small patch of garden Aris had planned but never planted. The unfurling leaves, a constant, gentle ache. Friends who once shared laughter and late-night debates now exchanged awkward glances when his name arose, the shared silence a heavier burden than any conversation. In the halls of academia, Aris's groundbreaking preliminary research papers were occasionally cited, footnotes in ongoing work, a ghostly reminder of the brilliance extinguished before its time. His potential, once a blazing star, had become a black hole of what-ifs. The scientific community, left to ponder not just his theories but the chilling void of his absence. Justice felt like a forgotten dream, left behind in the wilderness where he vanished. Revisiting the clearing, the woods seemed to have swallowed the exact spot where Aris was last seen. The undergrowth thicker, the trees taller, reaching towards a sky that offered no answers. The air was still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The only sounds, the rustle of unseen creatures and the distant call of a bird. It was a place of profound, undisturbed quiet, almost as if the earth itself held its breath, guarding a secret. A small, weather-beaten ribbon, tied years ago to a low branch by a hopeful friend, was barely visible now, bleached by sun and rain, a tiny flag of surrender in the face of nature's relentless indifference. The memory of Aris, so sharp and clear in moments of quiet reflection, felt impossibly distant here, swallowed by the vast, indifferent green. Yet beneath the surface of the overgrown peace, a persistent, unsettling tension lingered, a silent promise that this story, airied under 14 years, wasn't truly over. 14 years had passed, the raw wound of Aris's disappearance having faded into the dull ache of cold cases and local folklore. The year was 2013, and the dense woodland where the search had once been frantic was now just another job site. A crew of surveyors, their bright orange vests stark against the muted greens and browns, moved slowly, meticulously, through the brush near the old creek bed. Their work was tedious, sighting lines, hammering stakes, calling out measurements over the drone of cicadas and the distant hum of traffic on a newly expanded road that now skirted the edge of the property. Mike, the youngest, swatted gnats from his face, wishing he was anywhere but here, squinting through the transit as sweat trickled down his temples. Beside him, Ray, a man whose face seemed permanently set in a weary resignation, held the pole steady, his thoughts miles away on his mortgage payment and the dent in his truck he needed to fix. This was just ground, dirt, trees, a grid to be mapped, a future development site, devoid of the ghosts that haunted the memories of those who lived here in 1999. They talked about the fillies, complained about the humidity, the sheer ordinariness of their conversation, a stark, almost jarring counterpoint to the silent, screaming history of the place. They followed the faded markers left by a previous survey years ago, pushing deeper into a less trodden part of the woods, the canopy thicker here, the air cooler and damp. Ray adjusted his grip on the pole, kicking aside a tangle of roots near an old, moss-covered stone. He glanced down, ready to clear the spot for the next marker, when his boot connected with something yielding, unnatural, hidden just beneath the surface. A faint, metallic glint caught his eye in the gloom. The roar of the excavator had been the soundtrack for weeks, a constant mechanical grumble that vibrated through the hard clay, a monotonous rhythm of progress. Sunlight glinted off sweat-slicked foreheads and the steel teeth of the bucket, chewing up the earth inch by inch, preparing the ground for something new. It was just another Tuesday afternoon, the kind where thoughts drifted to dinner, to the ache in weary muscles, to the simple satisfaction of a day's work done. Then the sound changed. It wasn't the usual resistance of packed soil or embedded rock. There was a sudden, hollow give, a jarring emptiness where there should have been solid ground. The machine lurched slightly, its engine note deepening in confusion before sputtering to a halt. Dust settled in a slow cloud, and the sudden silence felt vast, unnatural. One worker, wiping grime from his brow, stepped closer to the edge of the freshly exposed cut. His boots crunched on loose soil. The others gathered behind him, murmuring questions that hung unanswered in the still air. There, at the bottom of the shallow trench, was not rock or earth, but a void. It was an opening, irregular and rough-edged, as if the ground had simply swallowed itself. The darkness within was absolute, a deeper black than twilight or shadow, a stark contrast to the bright sun overhead. It didn't look like a natural fissure. The edges seemed too defined in places, almost like a collapsed archway. A faint, cool draft wafted up, carrying the smell of damp, ancient earth, but also something else, something stagnant and unfamiliar that prickled the back of the throat. Initial surprise warred with a hesitant curiosity. Was it just a tricky sinkhole, or something else entirely? A few shuffled their feet, glancing at each other, a shared unease passing between them like an electric current. Stories they'd dismissed as old wives' tales about hidden places under the town suddenly felt less like fiction. There was a definite reluctance in their movements now, the easy camaraderie of manual labor replaced by a watchful silence. This wasn't just dirt and rock. This felt wrong. The opening seemed to pulse with a silent question, a promise of things unknown, hidden beneath the familiar surface of their world. The weight of the unexplored darkness below pressed down on them, a tangible presence drawing their eyes, hinting at depths far greater than they had ever anticipated digging. What secrets had just been unearthed? The narrow opening they had uncovered breathed a damp, cool air against their faces, a stark contrast to the dry, dusty tunnel behind them. A silent accord passed between the crew. This wasn't just a collapsed section. This felt deliberate, hidden. Curiosity wrestled with a primal unease in Elias's gut. Every instinct screamed caution, but the mystery tugged harder. He exchanged a look with Ben, a flicker of shared apprehension, then stepped forward. He wasn't the leader, not officially, but he was the one whose hands had first touched the void. Ducking low, scraping rock against his shoulders, he squeezed through the gap. The light from his headlamp vanished instantly, swallowed by the absolute blackness inside. Ben followed, then the others, the sound of their strained breathing echoing faintly. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the scent of wet earth and something else. Stagnant water, maybe, or something older, something that had been undisturbed for a long time. Each step was tentative, flashlight beams cutting jittery paths through the void, revealing only rough, uneven ground and glistening walls. The space felt tight, claustrophobic, pressing in from all sides despite being larger than the entrance suggested. Elias remembered childhood fears of being trapped, a brief, sharp image of being buried alive, flashing through his mind before he shoved it down. Just a cave, he told himself. Just a cave. But then the beams landed on something that wasn't rock. Near the entrance, half buried in mud, was a flattened, rusted tin can. Further in, a tattered piece of dark cloth lay snagged on a projection. These weren't natural intrusions. Someone had been here. A chill, colder than the damp air, crept up Elias's spine. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. They moved deeper, the cautious steps giving way to slower, more deliberate scans. Then Ben's sharp intake of breath, his light fixed on the wall. Carved crudely but undeniably into the rock face was a symbol, an unnatural spiral ending in a jagged point, eerily out of place amongst the natural formations. It looked old, unsettlingly so. It wasn't just that someone had been here. It felt like someone had waited here, left a mark deliberately in the deep, silent dark. The air grew heavier, charged with unspoken questions and growing dread, pulling them inevitably toward whatever lay further within the hidden passage. The air in the newly opened space hung thick and stagnant, a heavy curtain of dust motes dancing in the beam of their worklight. It smelled like damp earth, forgotten things, and something else, something unsettlingly sweet and cloying that made the back of Billy's throat prickle. He pushed deeper with his crew, shoulders brushing the rough-hewn stone walls, the low ceiling pressing down. Their boots crunched on loose soil and rubble, each step echoing in the sudden quiet after the roar of the jackhammer had ceased. This wasn't just a void. It felt like a tomb. Sweat traced cold paths down Frank's temples, despite the chill of the underground air. They weren't supposed to find this. They were just excavating the old foundation wall. Then, Terry's beam froze. "Hey, what in the—" His voice was a choked whisper. The others crowded around, lights converging on a small, cleared area in the corner. Nestled there, partially covered by fallen debris but undeniably arranged, was a collection of objects. A rusted metal box, overturned, spilling what looked like dried botanical samples, brittle and brown. Next to it, glinting dully, was a distinctive heavy silver watch, the kind Aris Thorne was rumored to always wear. And beneath a thin layer of soil, partially visible, was the unmistakable shape of a human skull. A collective gasp ripped through the dust. Billy felt the blood drain from his face, his stomach lurching violently. Frank stumbled back, his hard hat clattering against the wall. The smell intensified, sickeningly. This wasn't a cave-in victim. This was deliberate. This was Aris Thorne. The impossible, whispered ghost story of their town lay here, stark and horrifying, staring up at them with empty sockets. The implications slammed into them. He hadn't just disappeared. He had been here, in this hidden place, walled off from the world. The thrill of discovery evaporated, replaced by a profound, cold dread. The air grew heavier still, not with dust, but with the weight of a terrible secret unearthed. The past wasn't just history. It was buried right beneath their feet, waiting. Who else knew about this place? The forest floor churned under the weight of arriving vehicles. Sirens had long faded, replaced now by the clipped voices of command and the crunch of boots on pine needles and damp earth. A yellow cordon snaked through the trees, taping off the area around the unearthed stone. Police cruisers, marked and unmarked, formed a perimeter, their presence a stark, official intrusion into the quiet woods. Then came the forensics van, doors sliding open to reveal a world of sterile suits, silver cases, and equipment designed to speak for the silent. Scientists, precise and focused, emerged, their movements measured, their gazes sharp, already scanning the disturbed ground, the air, the very molecules. A temporary lighting rig was erected, casting harsh, clinical beams onto the entrance of the hidden space, cutting through the dappled daylight. Each step taken was slow, deliberate, recorded. Cameras clicked, capturing angles, textures, the overall grim tableau. The air thickened with tension, the smell of damp earth now mingling with the faint, metallic scent of sterile gloves. Carefully, meticulously, the team descended into the cramped, dark void. Flashlights sliced through the blackness, revealing the true extent of the discovery. It wasn't a natural cave, but something constructed, concealed. The confined space felt oppressive, stagnant. And there, the findings solidified the worst fears. Aris, his form, though long gone, lay in a position that screamed of unnatural circumstances. The first visual clues began to surface under the probing lights. Not the relaxed slump of a natural death, but a contortion. A forced stillness. Marks on the crumbling walls, scraped low down, suggested a desperate, clawing struggle in the dark. Fragmentary materials found nearby hinted at something used for restraint, perhaps cloth or thin rope, turning the idea of a simple fall into a horrifying possibility of confinement. The initial examination pointed to injuries inconsistent with accidental trauma, suggesting deliberate harm, a brutal force applied where no fall could explain it. Each piece of evidence, meticulously tagged and bagged, was another nail in the coffin of the accident narrative, resurrecting the ghost of foul play. For years, the truth had been buried, denied, dismissed. But here, in the sterile glow of forensic lights, surrounded by the quiet dedication of those seeking answers, the long-denied path to justice for Aris finally undeniably opened. The question now wasn't if something terrible had happened, but who had made it happen and why. The air in the cavern grew cold the moment Aris understood what he saw. It wasn't just rock and shadows. It was purpose, ancient and terrible, etched into the stone. A shiver, not from the damp, traced its way up his spine as the weight of his find settled. This wasn't history. It was something alive, something they wanted hidden. He carefully replaced the loose stones, heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. They wouldn't find it again, not if I was careful, he thought, his breath misting in the dim light. Just then, a faint scrape echoed from the main tunnel, too deliberate to be a falling stone. He froze, every muscle tensed. The sound grew closer, boots on gravel, heavy and slow. Fear, sharp and sudden, tasted like copper in his mouth. He clutched the small, worn notebook tucked inside his jacket, its pages filled with careful observations. now perhaps a record of his final moments. He flattened himself against the rough cave wall, the chill seeping through his thin shirt, trying to melt into the darkness. The boots stopped near the entrance to his hidden alcove. A low murmur, voices he didn't recognize, tight and urgent. He squeezed his eyes shut for a second, a flash of his mother's smile crossing his mind, a desperate, nostalgic pang for sunlight and safety. Just breathe. Stay still. They won't see you. But then a beam of light, harsh and cutting, sliced through the gloom, sweeping across the wall, inches from his face. His breath hitched. He knew, with sickening certainty, they weren't searching blindly. They knew he was there. A rough hand grabbed his arm, yanking him out with brutal force. He cried out, a choked gasp that was instantly stifled by another hand clamping over his mouth. He struggled, twisting, kicking out, but they were strong, too many. A cold dread washed over him, extinguishing the last flicker of hope. He saw the hard, knowing glint in their eyes in the flashlight beam. They weren't just silencing a witness. They were protecting something vital, something that demanded his erasure. They dragged him deeper into the maze of tunnels, the echoing scuffs of his boots against the floor, a grim soundtrack to his capture, pulling him towards a fate sealed by his discovery. They didn't need him alive, only silent, and the cold, echoing silence of the cave promised a long, lonely wait for the truth to find its way out. A sudden snap, sharp and too deliberate to be a branch falling, cut through the damp air. They froze, breath catching in their throat. The scent of wet earth and decaying leaves suddenly replaced by a prickling dread. Two figures emerged from the thick screen of conifers just ahead, stepping into the small, waterlogged clearing where Aris's last, faint trail vanished. They were men, roughly built, their faces grim masks of weathered indifference, clad in dark, practical gear that blended unnervingly with the shadows. This wasn't a chance encounter. Their stance was predatory, their eyes sweeping the clearing with cold, calculating intensity. The truth slammed into them with the force of a physical blow. These were the ones, not accidents, not wild animals, but these silent, imposing men, the human wolves guarding their territory. The hushed whispers about illegal logging crews pushing too far, the rumors of unsanctioned mining claims hidden deep in the backcountry. It all coalesced into a single, sickening reality embodied by the men advancing slowly, deliberately. Aris hadn't just gotten lost. She had found something, seen something, marked something in her meticulous notes that threatened the quiet, lucrative destruction these men facilitated. Her vibrant hope, her unwavering belief in the sanctity of this wild place, her fierce dedication to simply observing the natural world, it felt impossibly fragile against the brutal, efficient finality in their eyes. A wave of nausea twisted in their gut, the sheer callous injustice of it, extinguishing a light like Aris's, for the sake of scarred earth and stolen timber, was a bitterness that choked. The air crackled with unspoken violence, every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call seeming to amplify the heavy, watchful silence between them. One of the men raised a hand, a faint glint of metal catching the weak light filtering through the canopy, and the path they had followed here felt like a door slamming shut behind them. There was nowhere left to run. The shadows that had clung to Aris's memory for so long began to dissipate, not with sudden sunlight, but with the slow, grinding gears of justice. The faces responsible, once shrouded in the community's unspoken fear and suspicion, were finally brought into the harsh glare of accountability. Apprehension wasn't a dramatic chase. It was a quiet, relentless tightening of the net woven from forgotten data points and courageous testimonies. One by one, they were found. A hushed knock on a door at dawn. A somber escort from a place they thought was safe. The air surrounding these moments thickened with a tension that had simmered for years, now reaching its painful peak. In the sterile glow of the courtroom, Aris's mother clutched a worn photograph, her eyes fixed on the defendants who averted their gazes. Each word spoken by witnesses, friends recalling Aris's vibrant energy, colleagues detailing the promise of their work, investigators laying bare the cold facts, chipped away at the wall of denial, reconstructing the tragedy with heartbreaking clarity. The scientific community, grieving the loss of a brilliant mind and outraged by the betrayal of trust, watched intensely, a collective ache in their chests. They remembered Aris's excited voice describing hypotheses, the way their eyes lit up with discovery. Now, that light was extinguished, but the pursuit of truth Aris embodied fueled their own quiet determination. The verdict came down like a stone settling after a long drop, heavy, final. A collective gasp, then stifled sobs echoed in the room. For Aris's father, seeing the faces of those who had taken his child finally held accountable brought a wave of relief so potent it buckled his knees, yet it was immediately followed by the familiar, searing grief. Justice hadn't brought Aris back, but it affirmed their value, their stolen future. It declared, unequivocally, that what was done was wrong, unforgivable. Looking around at the tear-streaked faces of those who had loved Aris, there was a fragile sense of closure, a shared understanding that while the wound would never fully heal, the festering uncertainty was gone. The truth, painstakingly unearthed, had finally surfaced, proving that even in the face of immense sorrow, integrity and remembrance held undeniable power, a quiet, persistent force that would not be silenced. The path ahead was still obscured by pain, but the first step had been taken out of the darkness. Aris Thorne, the botanist who had walked among giants and sought secrets in the soil, was now defined as much by his end as his life. His legacy wasn't just in the specimens he collected or the papers he published, but in the profound, almost poetic tragedy of his final journey. For years, the wilderness had held its breath, guarding the fate of the man who loved it so fiercely. Whispers of his disappearance lingered like mist, a cold uncertainty that denied those who cared for him the solace of knowing. They pictured him lost, perhaps taken by a sudden storm or a treacherous fall, the wild reclaiming one of its own. But the discovery deep within the shadowed cave changed everything. It wasn't just a location, it was the final chapter, painstakingly written by his own hand in the damp, echoing silence. It proved his passion, his unwavering drive to understand nature's deepest mysteries, had led him not to a simple accident, but to a perilous, hidden truth. The site of his final resting place, the careful arrangement of his last findings, the quiet dignity of his remains surrounded by the earth he adored. It ripped away the years of agonizing speculation. There was no more searching, no more wondering. There was only the stark, heartbreaking reality. Empathy washed over those who learned his story now. They saw not a careless explorer, but a dedicated soul drawn irresistibly forward by the allure of the unknown, a man whose life's pursuit culminated in an unforeseen, tragic entanglement with forces far beyond his control. His love for the delicate balance of the natural world, the very thing that fueled his life, had, in the most cruel twist of fate, led him to its most brutal, unforgiving edge. Yet, in the telling of his story, spurred by the undeniable truth unearthed in the cave, there was a powerful, unexpected justice. His dedication wasn't forgotten. His final moments weren't swallowed by the wilderness. The cave became a testament, ensuring that Aris Thorne, the passionate botanist, the seeker of truth, would finally be understood, his journey acknowledged, his tragic end bringing a somber, final closure to a story held captive by uncertainty for far too long. Special epilogue. The air outside the cave felt different now, heavier with the weight of Aris's story, yet strangely lighter too, purged of years of unanswered questions. His legacy settled, not just among the scientific community who reviewed his final astonishing notes, but in the quiet corners of people's hearts. His tale became a stark reminder of nature's power, its beauty interwoven with its peril, and the profound responsibility humanity held to understand and protect it. From the depths of the earth, his truth emerged, a somber victory against oblivion. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by a quiet understanding of a man's final, solitary journey. Though tragedy marked his end, the enduring power of his discovery ensured his voice, silenced too soon, would finally be heard, resonating like a low hum carried on the wind across the mountains he loved. The darkness of the cave had surrendered its secret, allowing a fragile light of truth and empathy to finally shine on Aris Thorne.